Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. In the last session, we learned about TestNG basics and added it to our Selenium project. Today, we are going to start working with Selenium Locators. For the automation script to work, one of the main things that Selenium needs is to identify the elements on a web page. Only once the elements are identified, we can interact with them. And to identify the elements, we are going to use locators. Let me open a web page and show you how locators look like. So I'm going to go to Google and search for Selenium official website. There, I'm going to right click and click on Inspect. This opens up the HTML behind this web page, and this is exactly what we need to find locators to interact with the web page. Now you can see that I'm hovering over this HTML page and it highlights the elements that it represents on the web page. For the learning purposes, I'm clicking on various tags, expanding them to see how they are representing a web element, and I recommend that you do the same. Next, let's take a moment to refresh our HTML terminology. Here, the A represents a tag. href is an attribute, so is title, class, and ID. And this whole section is representing an element on web page. It's very important that we know the basic structure of HTML in order to effectively use Selenium for automation. Specifically, we must know what is a tag, what is an element, and what is an attribute. I hope the example that I just showed you clarifies that. Now that we know what are tags, elements, and attributes in HTML, let's go ahead and add Selenium scripts to identify different elements using Selenium locators. Okay, so let's open the Selenium project that we created in the last lesson. If you have not already set up the Selenium project on your machine, I would recommend that you take a pause here and watch the setup video first. Links to those lessons are provided in the description box. Once you are all set up, let's create a new class under the test folder. Also, I will be creating a sample HTML file here and will be using this file to learn about Selenium locators. Also note that I copied the sample HTML file content from Selenium's official website, and I'm going to just paste the content here in my file. Now I'm going to open the test class and the sample HTML file in a side-by-side view. Alright, now let's start writing our automation script. So first, I'm going to create a test method. Inside my method, the very first thing that I need to do is to initialize my Chrome browser. Note that I'm using Chrome browser here, but you can create session with a different browser of your choice. For example, if you wish to use Safari, your initialization code will look like this. If you want to use Firefox, then you will initialize like this. So make your choice and create the browser session. The second step is to take the browser action. In this case, we are telling Selenium to get to this URL, which will redirect us to Selenium's official website. Once we are navigated to this web page, we need to locate elements. There are 8 traditional locators that Selenium supports, namely class, ID, name, link text, partial link text, tag, CSS selector, and xpath. Now let's go ahead and locate elements by using these locators. The first one is by class name. To locate the input element in line 19, we are going to use class name. So we will write driver dot find element by class name, and then in brackets you are going to give the name of the class, which is information. The next locator is ID. To locate the element by ID, we are going to write driver dot find element by ID, and then in brackets you are going to give the value of ID, and in this case it's f name. To locate the element by name attribute, we are going to write driver.findElement by name, and in brackets you are going to give the value of name attribute, which is fname in this case. The next is link text. In this, you are simply going to write driver.findElement by link text, and in bracket you are going to give the link text, which in this case is Selenium official page. The next locator is partial link text. This is similar to link text. The only difference is that here you can search for partial text instead of full string. For example, in this case, I'm just going to search for Selenium official instead of Selenium official page. Moving on, the next locator is by tag name. This is simply going to look for the element with the tag name that we want, and in this case I'm going to look for label, and it's going to return us the first match of label. Next important locator is CSS selector. CSS selector can help us identify web elements by using various attributes like ID and class. It can also locate elements by using non-generic attributes. To further assist in finding the unique elements, CSS selector allows for combination of attributes. And finally, you can also search using substrings. To use ID attribute with CSS selector, we will write it as driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within the quotes you are going to put hash and then give the value of ID attribute, which is fname in our example. Note that the hash sign represents the ID, and this is the first way to use ID. The second way is to include tag name, so it will be written like this: driver.findElement by CSS selector, then within brackets and quotes you are going to give the tag name, which is input in this case, hash, and then value of ID attribute. And the third syntax that you can follow is driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets and quotes you put the tag name, and then within the square brackets you give the ID and its value, just like this. So this is all about using ID with the CSS selector. Now next is using class with CSS selector. To use class name, we are going to write it as this: driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets and quotes you are going to put a dot and then name of the class, which is information. And note that the dot represents the class name. The second way to follow is driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then you can use the tag name, which is input, dot information, which is the class name. And the third way is driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets and quotes you put the tag name, which is input, and then within the square brackets you put the attribute class equal to its value, which is information. Moving on, let's see how we can use any attribute, not just class and ID, but any attribute with CSS selector. To do so, we are going to write it like this: driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets and quotes first we are going to give the tag name, which is input in this case, and then within square brackets give the name of the attribute equal to its value. Next, let's see how we can combine various attributes to uniquely identify elements. So in my first example, I'm going to write driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets first I'm going to give the tag name, which is input, followed by hash fname, which is a representation of ID. Then within square brackets I'm going to write type equal to text. So in this example I'm able to combine the ID attribute with the type attribute. In my next example, I'm going to write driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets first I'm going to use the tag name, which is input, followed by dot, which represents a class, and then give the name of the class, which is information, and then within square brackets type equal to text. So in this example I'm able to combine the class attribute with the type attribute. Now let's see how we can use substrings with the CSS selector. The first example is driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets first give the tag name input, and then within square brackets you write class, and you note that symbol that I'm giving next, equal to infor. So that means that I want to look for the element with tag name input, and that has a class attribute that starts from string infor. Okay, now note the next example. Here I'm writing driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets I'm giving the tag name input, and then within square brackets I'm writing class $sign equal to tion. And now that means look for the tag named input, and then look for the class that ends with string tion. In my last example, I'm going to write driver.findElement by CSS selector, and then within brackets write tag name, which is input in this case, then class star equal to form, which means look for an element with tag name input that has a class whose name contains the substring form. I hope these examples helped you understand how you can use substrings with CSS selectors. Next, we are going to use xpath to look for various elements. The last and one of the most important locator that we are going to now learn is xpath. xpath allows you to navigate the structure of a web page's HTML. It helps to find elements that are not found by using generic locators such as ID, class, or name. There are two ways you can find element using xpath. First is by using absolute path, and second is by using relative path. Let me use an example to show you how you can write absolute xpath. In this web page, say I want to locate this input element. To get to this element, I'm going to first look for HTML root element. So I will write it like this: driver.findElement by xpath, and then I'm going to grab the root element, which is HTML. So we'll write it as /HTML, then narrow down to body element, then form, then within form element contains our input tag. It's the third input tag that we are interested in. So we will write it as input with index 3. This is simply how you write absolute xpath. But this format of xpath is not very popular. The reason is that if the HTML structure changes, if any of the element is removed or added, then the xpath won't work, and we will have to modify the path to make it work again. Because of this drawback, relative xpaths are preferred over absolute xpaths. With this, let's dive into relative xpaths. And here is the general syntax to follow. Start with /, then tag name, then square brackets followed by attribute name equal to, within single quotes, attribute value. Okay, let's try out this syntax. So we are going to use this input element as example, and we will write it as driver.findElement by xpath, and then within brackets and double quotes we'll write / tag name input, within brackets at class equal to information. In the next example, we are going to combine two attributes. So it will look like this: driver.findElement by xpath, within brackets / input, within square brackets at class equal to information, and then again square brackets at type equal to text. Next, we are going to make use of conditional operator. It's going to be like this: driver.findElement by xpath / input, within square brackets at class equal to information or at id equal to fname. This means look for an element input that either has class named as information or id named fname. Now, if you want to locate an element by its text, this is how you can do it with xpath. Driver.findElement by xpath / tag name, which is a in our example, then within square brackets use text function, text equal to Selenium. Now, if you want to search for an element by using text, but by not restricting it with a tag name, then you can use wildcard search like this. driver.findElement by xpath /* then within square brackets use text function equal to the text, which is Selenium in this case. These are some of the popular ways you can use xpath to locate web elements. And with this, we have concluded our lesson. As next steps, I would recommend that you open any web page, read through its HTML structure, and practice the locators that we have learned today. In the next lesson, we are going to talk more about xpaths. We will use real examples to create xpaths both manually as well as by using online tools. So stay tuned and keep watching.